What is scaffolding and why is it so important to teaching? Now, obviously, I'm not talking about building structures, but the support and guidance education professionals provide pupils who are learning skills for the first time. Hi everyone, I'm Natalie from My Progression, and this video is all about the strength of your scaffolds. So what are they? Why scaffolding is so important? What can happen if you use weak scaffolding? And what does good look like? So what is scaffolding? When you think of scaffolding, it usually refers to the structures or platforms you may see around buildings when they're under construction. These structures offer physical support and safety to the builders that use them, but the scaffolding we're referring to in education offers support and safety in a metaphorical way. In educational terms, scaffolding is the process of breaking lessons into manageable units, with the teacher providing decreasing levels of support as students grasp new concepts and master new skills. So just like building a house, the scaffolding is there to support whilst we lay the bricks, but as soon as they're in place, the scaffolding is removed. To understand what good scaffolding should look like, we've created a diagram to help you. Now, at the beginning of the pupil's learning journey, they'll require a lot of support and guidance from you, their teacher. You may be starting a new topic that your pupils haven't explored before, or you might be approaching a subject which requires more in-depth understanding than others. So you would start by offering lots of explanations, guidance, examples, and support as the pupils begin their tasks. Over time, your pupils' knowledge and confidence around the topic or subject will grow, and at this point, you can begin to reduce the amount of guidance or support that your pupils need, while still being there if they get stuck or are confused. So this process of removing this scaffolding promotes your pupils' independent learning. Eventually, your pupils' understanding will peak, and your support and guidance structures that you've put in place can be taken away. So this graph shows that as the pupil's knowledge and confidence increases, the scaffolding from the teacher decreases at the same rate. And the beauty of scaffolding also means if the pupil's knowledge or confidence goes backwards, you can reapply your scaffolding methods, offering more guidance and support until the pupils start to see improvements. As educational professionals, we'll often follow an I do, we do, you do model when teaching a class, and this method can work for any age or ability. This is the process of demonstrating a skill, then guiding the pupils through the skill together, and then handing the reins back to the pupils to allow them to develop independently. So what does scaffolding look like in practice? Well, scaffolding can look different depending on the age of your pupils or the subject that you're teaching. So let's look at a few examples to see how you can make it work for your lessons. First, let's imagine you're teaching a primary science lesson where you're talking about physical states. As a teacher, you first explain that everything around us is filled with atoms, and depending on how tightly packed together they are, depends on whether you're looking at a solid, liquid, or gas. I remember learning this in school, as the teacher had us all stand tightly together to be a solid, move a bit further apart for a liquid, and all bounce around the room for gas. So next, you could ask the pupils to experiment with different states. For example, you may hand them an ice cube, and they could observe the changes that happens as it melts. Or you can ask them to pour a glass of water into another glass to see how the liquid moves and forms. Now, during the experiments, you could leave a picture on the board for them to refer to, give them a handout with questions they need to answer, and walk around the classroom so you're available for any questions you might get asked. Now, lastly, you could set a homework task, asking the pupils to see how many different states they can find in their bedrooms at home. So here we started with a demonstration, then guided the pupils through their learning before removing that scaffolding, asking them to independently complete a task afterwards. Next, let's imagine you're teaching netball to secondary pupils. These pupils already know the basics of the sport, they've played a few games and tournaments. In this lesson, you're teaching them the importance of footwork to give them the upper hand in a game. First, you ask someone to throw your ball, and you demonstrate how to use your footwork to get the ball past a defender. You explain where you're stepping and why this way is more efficient. When asking your pupils to try it for themselves, you could start by placing markers on the floor so they know where to place their feet. These visual cues will remind them where to step, as well as letting them physically feel the difference in what you're teaching them. If pupils are struggling, you can work with them one-on-one while the other pupils practice. Ask them to mirror your body, or with their permission, move their feet to the place they should be. And once they're ready, You can run a game with them where their focus will be to implement what you've taught them. So in this example, we started by demonstrating the skill and explaining the benefit of it. Then allow the pupils to explore the skills themselves with your support before removing that scaffolding and letting them put it into practice. Now, what about an English lesson where you're exploring Shakespeare's more advanced vocabulary? You could start by showing your pupils a clip from Romeo and Juliet. This vocabulary may not make much sense to them just yet, but by watching the acting, they can interpret the intent behind the words. Next, you could give your pupils snippets from the play itself and ask them to highlight any words they're unsure about. Also, give them a handout that's filled with different Shakespearean words and their meanings. This can be a group exercise where they can find the answers out together, but you're always keeping an eye on them to make sure everyone's involved and learning. Now lastly, when you're happy that all the pupils understand, set a task where your pupils need to paraphrase the play into words that they would use nowadays. So here we've explained the skill and demonstrated it with video, then a group exercise to explore their learning before an independent task to prove their learning. Now, these are just a few examples. The same theory can be taken into any lesson you may have. We'd love to hear how you scaffold your lessons or any tips and tricks that you might have. Drop us a comment below with your advice, and whilst you're there, like, subscribe and click on the bell to keep hearing more from My Progression. Now, scaffolding is a really natural part of teaching. In fact, it's likely to be something you've done throughout your whole career without even consciously thinking about it. Because of this, structuring a lesson in a way that doesn't involve scaffolding would likely feel unnatural and wouldn't generate the best results from your pupils. Imagine you're teaching a design class where you want your pupils to make a box using wooden dowels and glue. But instead of scaffolding, you just hand the equipment to your pupils and leave them to crack on with it. You don't show them how to measure or cut the wood or how to connect the joints together, or give them any information such as steps to make the box or how long they have to make it. It's a bit like the technical challenge in Bake Off. They just get the basic ingredients and a list, and if you've watched it, you'll know the chaos that creates. Now that being said, there's still a difference between good and bad scaffolding in your classroom. Good scaffolding creates a support structure around your pupils that carefully balances challenge and security, whereas bad scaffolding means that pupils are left floundering or scared of making a mistake. So how do you know whether your scaffolding has been good or bad? Well, the answer is all in the results. If a pupil receives the right level of support through the scaffolding you provide, you can see the improvements such as their attainment increasing, their assessment scores improving, along with their general attitude towards learning. Now, we've mentioned not doing something being odd, but you can also just not do it well. So for example, you may end up going too fast or not taking time at each stage. This may not give all of the pupils time to follow and process what you've taught. I have done this myself when I've been teaching someone to do something for the first time. I've not had much time, so I've rushed through the instructions. And then when I've checked their work, it actually wasn't what I wanted at all. And this resulted in me spending twice as much time as I would have if I'd just slowed down and done it properly. Another example of doing this badly would be using language or terminology they're just not familiar with. They won't be able to follow it. And you can even over-scaffold. Now, whilst you'll demonstrate and explain your point really well, you'll likely lose their interest and engagement, and your lesson just won't have the intended impact. You're also going to promote a lack of independence. So if you don't scaffold properly, this is when you end up rescuing. So this is where the class or some of the class haven't grasped the basics, so you have to go back and reteach or rescue them. So when our scaffolds aren't strong and our students start to falter as a result, we tend to struggle and try whatever we can to save the lesson. This inevitably leads to you, the educator, doing more work. The question for you: who should work harder in your lesson, you or the student? It should be the student, as the majority of your work was done prior to the lesson or in that first 15 minutes. In a rescuing situation, the teacher is generally the only one working. The sole responsibility is placed on the rescuer. On the other hand, when scaffolds are built into their instructional plan, the student is working just as hard as the teacher, if not harder, as the teacher assumes a facilitative role, supporting, modelling, and encouraging. So scaffolding is a teaching method that allows you to keep control of your pupils whilst also making sure they're all learning and developing independently. If you scaffold your lesson effectively, then you won't need to rescue your pupils and you'll essentially get them to do more of the work. Remember that scaffolding is a tried and tested method that improves the way pupils retain information as well as reducing any frustration or confusion. By utilising the I do, we do, you do method, alongside different teaching methods and resources to enhance your pupils' learning, I'm sure that scaffolding will move your pupils from dependent to confident, independent learners. I've been Natalie from My Progression, and let's keep your career in motion.